Uvlulotak, buenos dias, good afternoon. Baglagipsi. Welcome and thank you for joining today's event. Uvanga Kazuglana, my name is Barb Amarok, and I'm very excited and honored to be part of this series and to be assisting as the facilitator today. Before we begin, I would like to inform you that this event is being recorded for those who are unable to attend. We start out by acknowledging that those at our Trathira campus in Fairbanks are on the unceded customary lands of the Dana people of the Tanana River. Here in Nome, we acknowledge the indigenous peoples upon whose customary lands our campus resides. The Northwest Campus is located on the customary lands of the Inupiaq, Siberian Yupik, and Yupik peoples. We honor the continued fight for the rights of First Peoples and stand together in solidarity and action. At the University of Alaska Fairbanks, we are growing into a socially just and caring institution of higher education. This ongoing speaker series titled Shine a Light, Promoting Conversations on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is designed to encourage understanding, build empathy, and engage us in thinking critically about our worldviews. The series is led by UAF's Northwest Campus, but like all great diversity efforts, there are many partnerships and collaborations. We thank the UAF Office of Rights Compliance and Accountability and the UAF Nanook Diversity and Action Center for teaming up with Northwest Campus to bring this series to reality. You can find the recordings of past presentations on the Northwest Campus website under the Community and Events tab. This link will be added to chat. Again, thank you for being here for today's event, and we hope you continue to join us. I would now like to introduce and thank our speaker, Joan Ryan Estay, for today's presentation, Understanding the Real Needs of Latinos in Alaska, First Needs Assessment Done in the Hispanic Latino Community, and the Call to Action with an Evidence-Based Decision-Making Approach. Joan Ryan Estay, originally from Viña del Mar, Chile near Santiago, left Chile at the age of 25 to volunteer abroad, during which time she would meet who today is her husband. After living a few years in Oregon, Joan and her family moved to Alaska in 2015. Joan holds a bachelor's degree in performing arts, an associate degree in health and natural therapy, and an MBA in strategic leadership from Alaska Pacific University. She works as a program coordinator for the Healthy and Equitable Communities Unity for the state of Alaska, teaches as an adjunct faculty member in the Department of Foreign Languages and Literatures at UAF, and she is the board president of Enlaces, a Hispanic Latino nonprofit in Alaska. Joan has also served as the chair of the Anchorage Women's Commission for the Municipality of Anchorage and was former vice president of the Alaska National Organization for Women in Anchorage. Joan loves spending her time traveling to different places in the world and pack rafting with her husband. She is also a two-time Mount Marathon race participant in Seward, Alaska. Please use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions that Joan may address at the end of her presentation. You are more than welcome to use the chat feature, but please be sure to put your questions in the Q&A feature so we don't miss them. Thank you. And at this time, I present Joan Ryan Estay.
Thank you, Barb, for that introduction. I just lost Zoom. Just give me a second. Okay. And I also want to acknowledge that I live and work on the land of the Dena'ina here in Anchorage, Alaska. And as Barb said, my name is Joan Ryan Estay, or Joan Ryan Estay in Spanish. I do have two last names, honoring my dad's side of the family with Ryan and my mom's side of the family with Estay or Estay. And it's also a very Spanish way to carry your last names. So when they asked me to make a presentation for Shine a Light, I accepted almost immediately. And then I started thinking, what should I present about? Nothing came to mind, and I thought I was in big trouble, right? And then I remembered that with Enlaces, we just did a statewide needs assessment, and we had just gotten the results back. So what a better opportunity to talk about them here for Hispanic Heritage Month. The results of the needs assessments are just out of the oven. So the information that you're about to see in the presentation is as accurate as it can get. So let's dive into it and share my screen with you. Okay, I think we're good to go.
Yep, you're all good.
Thank you. Okay, so understanding the needs of Alaska's Hispanic Latino community. The Latino population in the US is growing. Over the past 10 years, the Hispanic Latino population has grown 23% and reached an estimate of 62.1 million people across the country. This is significantly larger in comparison to the overall population growth, which was 7%. Our state is not different. In fact, the percentage is even higher. Over the last decade, Latinos have accounted for 46% of the state's population growth. That's almost half of the increase and represents a population of 10,000 people. In fact, they represent 7.3% of the state's population, and that's around 52,000 people, up from 5.5% in 2010. This positions them as the second largest minority group, with Native Americans and Alaska Native communities being the largest in the state. It's apparent that this population has grown rapidly and likely to continue. And there is a need for a comprehensive understanding of the Latino Hispanic community and its needs. And that's what Enlaces has set out to do. At the core of our work at Enlaces, our mission is to empower, educate, and engage Alaska Latina community by acting as a catalyst for an equitable presence and voice. So we wanted to shine a light on our community by representing who we are, identifying our community's needs, and sharing our opinions and perspectives. To achieve this, we partnered with BSP, a firm with over 20 years of experience helping political, corporate, and community-based organizations understand a diverse America and craft the best messages to communicate the complex and layered diversity of our country. So how did we accomplish this? We conducted a statewide survey to gain a quantitative look at Alaska's Hispanic Latino community, specifically focusing the Anchorage area. The survey involved live telephone interviews, text messages, emails, online panels, and community crowdsourced online responses. Our survey was conducted from January to March of 2023. The result was a sample size of 449 respondents all over the state. This quantitative assessment was aided by a series of 2 focus groups conducted in English and in Spanish, respectively, to gain a qualitative insight into the status of the Hispanic Latino community. The result is the first ever needs assessment of Alaska Hispanic Latino community, a unique glimpse into our community that provides us with data to make evidence-based decisions that can best serve our state's community and help us shape a roadmap so that we can help it thrive. So what are our key findings? Latinos in our state have a wide variety of concerns for their community. Our survey includes the opinion of 17 different key concerns, including police brutality, education, climate change, and even the option to write their own opinion if it wasn't on the list. Respondents were able to provide their top 3 concerns. The results show cost of living, healthcare cost, and the economy as their top concerns in that order. The latter is particularly important because most in the community feel that their economic condition is stagnant. According to our survey, 56% of the respondents have not experienced any improvement in their financial situation over the last year. This lies at the center of many of the issues concerning Hispanic Latinos in Alaska. Many find themselves struggling to pay for basic living costs. For instance, over 70 of the respondents found healthcare costs to be expensive. Only 3 of them consider them to be a good deal. 72 respondents said the same about health insurance costs. In addition, 73 respondents reported that their living expenses, which includes rent and groceries, were also expensive. Our research also found that Latinos in our state look beyond their own community and are concerned about the state's well-being. This especially stood out when we looked at the data from the participants' perceptions of homelessness and our state's substance misuse challenges. For 72 of our survey respondents, substance abuse in the state is a serious concern, and they see that it's either not changing or getting worse. Additionally, 70 respondents said the same about homelessness. Notably, there's a significant urban-rural gap. Homelessness in particular is a much more salient and growing concern for Latinos in Anchorage, who are more likely to view it as a serious issue that is getting worse, with 47% reporting in Anchorage compared to Latinos in other areas of the states with 26%. However, something that stood out and is threaded through all these concerns is an innate desire both to understand and to be understood by the broader Alaskan community. Yet, this is prevented by community integration barriers, like the profound lack of access to Spanish language resources and the lack of social infrastructure to develop bonds with others further. This lack of language access is pervasive. Our findings shows that 54% of Latinos speak Spanish daily, 27% report being bilingual, and 43% of the Latinos in our state report that they have needed to use translation services for medical care, legal assistance, and even in places like a shopping mall. What's particularly more concerning is that in the rare cases that Spanish speakers have access to these services, they often report discriminatory experiences, especially those who have a thick accent or don't speak English. Some of the quotes from our focus group show this reality. These quotes were originally said in Spanish, but we translated them for the purpose of this presentation. Here in Alaska, I have not witnessed equal treatment for everyone. My right to be assisted as a victim was taken away from me when I couldn't access services in a public office. In front of the court, because English is not my first language, I had to get up and leave since I was denied access to a translator. I can speak English, but legal terminology is different. It's not the same as just standing up in front of a judge and expressing what you think or what you want. Another quote said, I was working in 2 cases and so many, and there was a gasp there. There is a place called Awake, which is a shelter for abused women. In one of the cases, there was a woman who did not receive assistance. She was admitted there, but she couldn't communicate. There was no one who spoke Spanish. The lack of language resources also includes the lack of programming that allows for bonds to develop cultural connections. Often respondents and participants in our research reported feeling lonely. Another quote was, it has been very difficult not having a local community or ways to connect locally with other Latinos. In addition, the lack of language resources limits the ability of media that Latinos in our state have to access the news. According to our research, 78% of Latinos in Alaska regularly obtain their news from social media, followed by local English news sources with 72%. This forces non-English speakers to rely on social media, as Spanish-English bilingual outlets in the state are almost non-existent. This is especially important given the rise of disinformation campaigns that intentionally target Spanish-speaking audiences at the national level. Despite all of this, Latinos in Alaska love our state. 81% of the respondents have a positive view of the equality and access of parks and recreational facilities. Many respondents report feeling safe and happy with the protections for minorities and immigrants. However, it's important to highlight that the second most common response is this condition as mostly bad. So it's important to clarify that these perspectives are not universal and there is a need for reform for more equitable conditions in this regard. But most importantly, a sizable portion of respondents report being happy and reveal either stability or improvement in their quality of life. This community, which is happy and committed to our state, plays an essential role in our society and deserves to be included. In our opinion, the next step for this inclusion is focusing on language access. This means providing more robust language and social services resources that allows for Hispanic Latinos in Alaska to participate effectively in our society. This can include increased translation of documents of government procedures, ensuring availability of translated legal and medical resources, as well as interpreters, and seeing our community as a whole and creating meaningful collaborations to address our needs. This transcends our community. Alaska is one of the most diverse states in the country, and while our research focuses in our community, similar steps need to be followed to increase access for all languages. In addition, it will bring us into compliance with federal law. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Executive Order 13166 encompasses language access. Therefore, complying with language equity allows for our state to participate in more federal grant programs and assist not only our state's Latino community, but also our whole population. So it's time to include the Alaska Latino community because it's the right thing to do. Thank you. And before we go to Q&As, I wanted to share with you what we Web Enlaces has prepared for Hispanic Heritage Month. So we have a cultural night at the Anchorage Museum that will be on October 6th from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. That's a free event. We also have the Community Latino Health Fair at the Denina Center on October 7th from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. That's also free, except for the blood draws, which are very inexpensive. And then we have our Fiesta event fundraiser at the Denina Center, also on October 7th from 6 p.m. and 12 a.m. And that's a paid event. So with that, if anyone has any questions that want to ask me, I guess I'll go to the chat now, Casey.
Thank you, Joan. We do have quite a few questions and comments. The first one I will share with you is, thank you for sharing. What was your response rate? Also, what were the demographics of respondents and how representative were they of the population?
Yeah, so we had people from I believe 12 to 15 different countries. The most predominant country was Mexico. However, we got people from Venezuela, Colombia, Chile, Honduras, etc. And what was the other part of the question, Barb? Sorry. Are they here in the chat?
No. The second part was also, what were the demographics of respondents and how representative were they of the population?
Okay.
What was the response rate?
Yeah, so they were very represented from the our state. As I said, a big majority of them were from Mexico, which that actually reflects our state as well. It was actually very representative.
Thank you. Then, not a question, just thank you for such important and clearly presented information. And then another question, did your needs assessment include specific health information?
Like diabetes, like things like that?
I'm not sure, but that was the question.
Yes.
Specific health.
Okay. So yes, some of the questions had specific on health. Yes, we did. And we do have that information.
Wonderful. Then you showed the slide of upcoming events, but the question a little bit earlier was, are there any events in Fairbanks?
That's a great question. I have been talking to the Spanish Club, and there's a possibility that there's something is going to happen. That's to be determined. So I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for that.
Okay. And then in the data visualizations, are the numbers shown number of respondents or percentages?
So in the slideshow, when it's percentages, and then when it doesn't have a percentage, then it's the amount of people that answered that specific questions. Because the survey was quite long and not everyone answered all the questions. So when we talk about, say, 72 respondents, that's basically the amount of people that answered that question. I hope I was clear in my answer.
I think so. Then one of the participants asked, I am part of a small local nonprofit in Kodiak, Association of Latin Women in Alaska, ALMA. Are there other nonprofit groups in the state that we might connect with?
That's a great question. And right now, I don't know of any others. I know that Anchorage has a kind of like an artist nonprofit, but it's a very small nonprofit. And rather than that, I don't know any other groups, to be honest. I know that sometimes universities have Spanish groups. I know for sure that Fairbanks has a Spanish club, and I believe UAA has to have the same thing. Rather than that, that's all of that I know of.
Okay. So it's very clear that Enlaces is not a huge organization, but is addressing very real issues and priorities. So the next question is, does Enlaces find or does Enlaces know, has Enlaces determined or know that the Alaska K-12 school system authentically and adequately represents the Hispanic, Latino, Latina identity, language, history, and life ways, or is there need for improvement?
So we're always trying to improve. One of our board members, she is from the Anchorage School District. She's pretty new, but she has done and gave us a lot of information, and she's actually working with us. And she was the link for us to get teachers to teach with Alaska Literacy Program, GED in Spanish. So she is basically like our education chair for the education committee, if you want to call it that way. She's great, and she's always letting us know who to call or who, how can we improve and do different partnerships.
Wonderful. So there's a comment in Q&A related to an earlier question, and the participant says, a response rate is the percent of people in the population who responded to the survey. How many Latino adults are there in Alaska versus how many were sent the survey versus how many responded to the survey?
You can send me an email because I have all that specific information that we do have. And I'm happy to share it with you, but I don't have it right now. That specific information with me. I have it in my computer though.
Okay,
I'll be
thank
happy
you.
to share it.
Okay, and let's see, we have a couple of questions related to university. How can University of Alaska Fairbanks increase engagement and retention for Hispanic, Latino, Latina students in student affairs? And I think the point of that question is the university taking the steps to be more effective with the with certain populations, not only Hispanic, Latino, but also other populations too. And the other part of it is, what efforts would you like to see academic institutions like UAF take to better support employees and students?
Yeah, so I think that for the retention part of the question, so as any community, one of the things that we all kind of need is having time with our culture, right? I think one a really good idea will be to keep having, for example, the Spanish club, hopefully with a lot of different countries, right? For example, I'm from Chile, and we don't have very many Chileans, but when we meet, I'm so happy just because I'm with people that share my same traditions, my same language. It's just being with people that understand your culture. So I will say just making more, like a little bit more of an effort to recognize, and it's not just, oh, you're Latino, you're from Mexico, which happens a lot. So actually going a little bit further and saying, okay, where are you from? And hopefully having different conversations about it. Then the other part of that question is like how, oh, and the other thing that I wanted to mention is that Enlaces with University of Alaska offer scholarships for Latinos. And we've seen that not very many people apply to those scholarships. So I would say that maybe a little bit more of an effort to do more marketing through the university, we try to put it in our social media a lot. And I think this year we were able to get a lot of questions about it and just a few applicants. So it will be a great way to just send this information out. And the other question about how to support teachers, I would say to ask them directly what they need, and see if if they're happy basically with the university, with the department, what are their needs, and yeah, and see if they are being paid accordingly as well.
Thank you, Joan. And I would like to add that one of the University of Alaska Fairbanks strategic plan 2027 goals is to embrace and grow a culture of respect, diversity, inclusion, and caring. So what you're talking about directly relates to one of the major intentions of our university. We have a question about services. How can systems such as the social service system, and you've addressed this already, but here's the question. How can systems such as the social services system and the medical system in Alaska more effectively serve Hispanic, Latino, Latina citizens?
I would say the first thing will be ask them if they feel more comfortable speaking in English or in Spanish. Some of them feel comfortable speaking in English, great. But there are a lot of people that don't, and sometimes they're afraid to tell you. So it's basically making an environment where they feel safe and where they can tell them, I understand better in Spanish. And I do believe that a lot of agencies are doing, they do have the resources like language access, and sometimes they bring translators as well. And I think it's great because it has actually, it's closing a gap right there. However, sometimes the translation services are not very accurate, and that has created sometimes a problem in translation. But that's a further problem, you know what I mean? Because they do have the services there, then it comes with the translator not doing a very good job. It's not in every case, but I know it has happened, and I have been hearing it from different people, so I know that it happens more than once. So basically, it will be to have a safe environment, basically, for someone that doesn't speak English very well. And if they feel that they needed translation services, to give it to them. And the other thing is like not encourage people to bring their family members to translate. I don't think that's the best way to go unless it's in an emergency. Because sometimes kids can be translating for parents for things that they shouldn't be translating.
Thank you. That's very eye-opening. Thank you. So we're continually getting more questions. People are very interested. So the next question is, Does your survey identify trends in job placement and or workforce development needs?
Not specifically, unfortunately.
Okay. And then the next one, besides cost of healthcare and insurance, did Enlaces look at access to healthcare for the Latina population? I'm also curious about job safety, knowledge, access to safe working environments for the population.
Yeah, not a lot of those questions were asked in our survey. We asked, I can't remember how many questions, and some of the questions were a little bit broader. And that's why we ended up doing two focus groups, so we could go further into those questions. Unfortunately, because we did a lot of questions in like education, healthcare, economy, we were not able to make specific. And some of those issues did not come up in the focus groups like we hoped to get. You know, like focus group just start talking about that. I believe we had questions that we asked, and then, you know, it got way deeper towards those questions, but it was depending on the response of the survey. So for example, we asked them a lot about the economy, and then language access. So no. However, I wanted to let everyone know that I'm very happy to share the entire survey. So you can see the amount of people that actually answered, where they're from, and all the other questions that we have, if anyone wants them. I mean, I think it's actually, the more we share, the more we learn. And if it will help people with the Latino Hispanic community in their area, I'm more than happy to share it with them.
Wonderful. That was actually another of the questions. It was about, would the results of the survey be available to view? So that you addressed that before I asked it. Thank you. And then there's a question. Are you talking to immigrants, first generation, or anyone with Latino Hispanic descent?
Like, am I talking in the survey?
I assume that means, are you serving, are you working with?
Yes.
Um,
So we work with anyone. So even if you are here undocumented, we still help you out. In what sense? I mean, we're not an immigration service at all, but we put events out. For example, we have Dia del Niño in April, I believe, and we have vaccination for kids. We have a lot of other different resources that people can come and take. So there are a lot of agencies from the community that share their resources in English and in Spanish. We also do the health fair, for example, that we're having on October 6th. Everyone is welcome. And for example, for your blood draws, the results go to your house. We don't ask for your ID or anything like that. You can come, do your blood pressure, you can go and last year we had people checking your I think they're called varicose veins right there at the health fair. So whoever comes, we actually work with. We have volunteers that are young girls, first generation here, and then we help elderly people come to our health fairs. I hope I answered that question.
Yes, the person typed in, that was my question, and I meant that question in reference to the survey. Who was the primary target of the survey?
Okay, thank you for clarifying. So we target all Latinos here, third generation, first generation, all of them, everyone that considers themselves to have Latino, Hispanic descent.
Okay, then a comment and another question. Thank you for the information about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is not a question of special treatment, but a question of equal and equitable treatment according to law. And then another question, is there a list of cost for lab draws?
Yes, yes, there are. The top of my mind, I think that the most comprehensive one that has like 28 panels is $45. Then it goes down. I think your A1C is $25. The TSH is like $35. So the most expensive one is the $45. And also, if people cannot pay, in our social media, we have put that please write to salud at enlacesak.org, and we can pay for those lab works. So Enlaces will be giving coupons for people that cannot afford those lab draws.
Okay, we have another question. And I do believe this next question also relates to Alaska Native communities. Learn Hispanic, Latino, Latina community and other communities such as Alaska Native communities, with learning on the part of the communities of topics such as microaggressions and institutional racism benefit.
Barb, can you repeat the question? You got cut at the beginning.
Yes. Would learning on the part of the Hispanic Latino community of such topics as microaggressions and institutional racism benefit?
Absolutely. Yes, I think it will benefit everyone, not just a few people. I think that everyone that learned those things will benefit, and we can all live in a better place, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree with you. The more people know, the more people understand each other, the better the relationships, the better the work, the better the service can be. The next question is, can this recording be made available to share with my local group? And I can answer that. If you keep an eye out for, well, yes, I can answer that. If you visit the nwc.uaf.edu website, it will be up, not immediately, but it will be up under the Community and Events tab. So I'm looking for more questions. And I don't see any. Oh, there, somebody writes, thank you. So do you have any last comments, Joan?
Yeah, so I want to thank everyone that came, and also to share that in Enlaces, we are a board of 5 people. We're all volunteers. We try to do our best to serve our community as much as we can. And we're growing, and we hope to, serve our community well. And we're also looking for new board members. I'm going to put it out there right away. Because we, as the presentation said, we're a lot of Latinos here, and Enlaces started 5 to 6 years ago, trying, just because we knew that there was a need for a space for the Latino community. So we try to do our best with the time that we have, and hopefully we can keep growing, where we can have different, places in Kodiak or in Juneau. We have a board member that's in Fairbanks. He comes to our Fiesta fundraiser every year. He's our secretary, and he takes really good notes, and he's also a very good friend of mine. But hopefully, we can have people from all over the state so they can also do events in their places. We're always here to answer your questions. If you can put something, say if there's a grant available in your community and you need some direction, please write us an email so we can also help you out. We cannot write the grant for you, but we can give you all the feedback that we have or that we have gained with this 4 years of experience. Hopefully Enlaces grows to be, where we can have staff members, so the board members don't have to do all the work because it's a lot of work. And that's where we're working now, to hopefully get some paid staff and just keep growing, because we do need an agency that targets the Hispanic Latino community and help them out and answer questions. So I just want to put that out there, and I want to thank also all the other board members, because it's a team effort. It's not just me doing this, it's all of us. And thank them as well, and thank everyone that showed up to this presentation.
Thank you. And actually, there's one more question that just popped up. Are there any plans to expand survey to rural communities?
Actually, this needs assessment was done with a grant from the municipality of Anchorage. It's called the ARPA funding. And this was a statewide survey. So I know that there were respondents from all over the state. However, we had to focus it in Anchorage because the grant was from Anchorage. And also most of the Latinos live in Anchorage. But if they ask for the information, I can tell them where. Actually, in our focus groups, we had people living in Denali. I think there were also in Kodiak or Ketchikan. No, maybe Kodiak. This is a very expensive project. So to expand it to other communities, we can do it. We can give it the resources, but it just as a heads up, it was quite expensive.
Yes, yes. Thank you. We have a last comment. I think it's the last comment. Muchas gracias, Joan. And also, the team here says thank you for your long-standing and passionate dedication to equity, inclusion, and respect. And to the viewers, thank you for joining us today. Please keep an eye out for upcoming Shine a Light presentations at nwc.uaf.edu or facebook.com/uaf.nwc. If you'd like to share the recording or give feedback, you can do so by visiting the Community and Events tab at nwc.uaf.edu. We will now be closing out this webinar. Thank you, Joan, and thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.